Please like and subscribe. At a 6:28 local time, the sun was just beginning to burn through the heavy morning mist hanging over occupied Kherson. To the casual observer, it appeared to be the start of a standard military day. At Gvardeyskoye Airbase, 2 Russian military helicopters sat heavy and dormant on the concrete tarmac, their crews moving through pre-flight checklists with the practiced lethargy of men who believe they are safe. Meanwhile, 35 kilometers away in the calm waters of Sevastopol harbor, a tugboat and a specialized Russian Special Forces dive team were busy loading classified cargo. The morning had been deceptively quiet so far, but that silence was a lie. Everything was about to change in exactly 4 minutes. The Russian crews were completely oblivious to the fact that 12 Ukrainian drones, launched from sea vessels miles offshore, were currently tearing through the air toward their targets at a speed of 140 kilometers per hour. Fortunately for the Ukrainian operators, these garage-built machines came equipped with a critical advantage. But first, simply to reach the starting line of their attack, they had to survive a chance encounter on the open water that nearly ended the operation before it began. A Russian Raptor-class patrol boat, executing a routine sweep of the coastline, suddenly shattered the pre-dawn darkness with violence. Its 14.5mm heavy machine gun roared to life, hammering the shadows on the water with high-caliber rounds. The sharp-eyed gunner had spotted 3 faint heat signatures racing toward the Crimean peninsula at 35 knots. These were Ukrainian unmanned surface vessels, and atop their sleek hulls, they carried the 12 aerial drones strapped to waterproof launch rails, tracer rounds, specialized bullets that burn bright magnesium so gunners can correct their aim, lit up the black sky like deadly fireworks. The Raptor accelerated to 48 knots, its twin engines screaming as it closed the distance. The Ukrainian vessels were effectively trapped. Their maximum speed was only 35 knots. They were surrounded by open water, and there was absolutely nowhere to hide. The Russian gunner walked his fire closer with each burst, the splash of the heavy rounds creeping within mere meters of the fleeing drones. In a desperate gambit, the lead vessel suddenly veered hard to the right, heading straight for the treacherous shallow reefs near Cape Chersonis. The other 2 vessels split off, one breaking left and the other shooting up the center, forcing the patrol boat captain to make a split-second choice. The Raptor's depth finder began to scream urgent warnings. 2.5 meters, 2 meters, then 1.8 meters. The captain knew these waters by heart. Just 1 meter deeper, and the jagged volcanic rock below would tear his hull open. He slammed the throttles into reverse, the boat shuddering as it fought its own momentum. At exactly 1,800 meters from the stalled Raptor, the vessels initiated their emergency drone deployment sequence. The launch rails snapped vertical. 12 drones rocketed skyward simultaneously, climbing at a velocity of 50 meters per second. The Russian gunner frantically tried to track them, cranking his weapon upward. But the barrel hit the mechanical stops with a metallic clank. The gun's maximum elevation was 60 degrees. The drones were already soaring at a 75-degree angle. Simple geometry had just defeated a weapon system worth millions of dollars. However, the drones were unaware that a toothless Raptor was the least of their worries. As they leveled off, the Russian electronic warfare network woke up. The Murmansk BN system, activated from the Kharkiv Peninsula, began blasting the sky with invisible noise. Imagine someone turning on a 400-kilowatt radio jammer that blocks every frequency you can think of. A standard home Wi-Fi router puts out 1/10 of a watt. This machine turns the entire electromagnetic spectrum into a wall of static. But the situation was worse than just noise. The Russians were not simply blocking GPS signals. They were feeding the drones false information. The navigation screens showed the drones were 15 kilometers away from their actual position. If the drones continued to fly based on those coordinates, they would fly straight into the empty ocean. The Ukrainian operators had prepared for this exact scenario. They immediately switched the fleet to inertial navigation. The drones stopped listening to satellite signals and started listening to their own internal gyroscopes, tracking their movement by counting every meter traveled and remembering every turn. The drone formation regrouped at an altitude of 2,000 meters. Sevastopol harbor lay 22 kilometers to the southwest. Gvardeyskoye Airbase sat 35 kilometers due south. The mission parameters were crystal clear. One team would hit the naval base, the other would strike the airfield. Both targets had to be hit simultaneously to prevent alert messages from ruining the element of surprise, as the patrol boat fired futilely at the escaping vessels, which were disappearing into international waters. The 12 drones overhead split into 2 groups. 6 headed inland toward the airbase. 4 descended toward the harbor. 2 remained at altitude to act as communications relays. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the Crimean coast in gold. It would provide the perfect cover for the destruction to come. At 0617, 4 drones descended through the morning fog towards Sevastopol harbor. The naval base was a fortress, bristling with defenses, Pantsir missile systems, radar arrays, and hundreds of sailors on watch. But the drones had one advantage. Nobody expects an attack moving at the speed of a bicycle. The Pantsir S-1 system locked onto the drones immediately. This machine is a marvel of engineering, capable of tracking a tennis ball from 20 kilometers away. These drones should have been easy prey, but the system's computer kept rejecting them. The Pantsir was designed to intercept cruise missiles screaming in at 300 meters per second. These drones were dawdling along at 11 meters per second. The tracking algorithm literally could not believe that something would fly that slowly on purpose. It is like setting a speed trap on a highway that ignores anyone driving under 20 miles per hour. The software assumed the targets must be birds or floating debris. The drones dropped to an altitude of 10 meters, weaving between anchored warships. At this height, radar waves bounce off the water and cancel themselves out. The massive steel hulls of the patrol boats created perfect radar shadows. A sharp-eyed sailor spotted them first, pointing and shouting an alarm. The Pantsir operator switched to manual optical tracking, using an ultra-expensive camera system. But morning fog had rolled in, cutting visibility to 800 meters. The system needed 3 seconds of steady tracking to calculate a firing solution. The drones would jink every 2 seconds, never giving the computer enough data. It was like trying to focus a camera on a hummingbird. By the time you locked on, it was gone. Their target, a Buk 2190 tugboat, sat moored at Pier 7, its crew conducting morning equipment checks. This was not just a harbor workhorse. It supported Russia's PDSS, their underwater special forces. These combat divers trained for years, using gear worth millions of dollars. The tugboat carried diving chambers, underwater propulsion vehicles, and enough demolition equipment to sink a destroyer. Taking it out was the first part of a 2-pronged attack against the upcoming Russian Special Forces operation. They also needed to take out the helicopters. If even one attack failed, the enemy could quickly acquire more assets. 2 sailors manning the tugboat's DH heavy machine gun spotted the incoming drones at 400 meters. The weapon roared to life, firing rounds the size of human thumbs at 850 meters per second. But the mount only elevated to 60 degrees. The lead drone approached from almost straight above, diving at an 80-degree angle. It presented a target area of exactly 0.09 square meters. Here is the problem with human reaction time. It takes 250 milliseconds to see something and pull a trigger. At 200 kilometers per hour, the drone traveled 14 meters in that quarter of a second. The gunner was literally shooting at after images, his rounds always trailing behind reality. The other 3 drones came in low from different compass points. The gun needed 6 full seconds to turn 180 degrees, and 6 seconds is an eternity when you are under attack. The first drone slammed into the bridge windows at 140 kilometers per hour. Its shaped charge, a copper cone wrapped in 3 kilograms of explosives, created a jet of molten metal moving at 8,000 meters per second. It punched through steel and glass like they were paper. The bridge instantly filled with smoke and flame. The second drone hit precisely at the waterline. Water pressure at 1 meter depth equals 1.1 atmospheres through a meter-wide hole. That pressure forces in roughly 33,000 gallons per minute. The tugboat immediately listed 20 degrees to port. Diving equipment worth millions of dollars slid across the deck and splashed into the harbor. The PDSS team had been loading their gear for the morning mission, likely underwater reconnaissance. Now, they were watching all of it sink. Underwater demolition charges and specialized diving gear sank into Sevastopol's muddy bottom. The entire special operations capability of the Black Sea Fleet's elite divers had just been eliminated in 30 seconds. But this was just the first strike. 6 more drones were still racing toward Gvardeyskoye Airbase, where helicopter crews were starting their pre-flight checks, completely unaware that the welcome wagon, was on the way. The 6 drones approaching Gvardeyskoye had flown 35 kilometers inland, burning through 60% of their batteries. They followed the highway at 3 meters altitude, using morning commuter traffic as cover. Every time a truck passed underneath, the drone's signatures disappeared in the radar scatter. They were threading the needle between power lines, road signs, and bridge overpasses at 140 kilometers per hour. At 6:21, they reached the Airbase perimeter. The base's Tor M2 system, a mobile surface-to-air missile launcher that cost $25 million. Should have engaged them at 15 kilometers, but the Tor has a secret weakness. The radar does not look everywhere at once. It sweeps in elevation bands, and the entire cycle takes 4 seconds. High scan, medium scan, low scan, repeat. There is always a blind spot. The drone operators had timed this perfectly. They watched their synchronized chronometers, waiting for the exact moment the Tor's beam would sweep upward. At 06:21 and 14 seconds, the radar beam tilted up to scan above 500 meters. The drones, flying at just 3 meters altitude, had a 4-second window to cover 400 meters of open ground. They accelerated to maximum speed, 180 kilometers per hour, racing across the perimeter while the Tor's radar painted the empty sky above them. By the time the beam swept back down at 06:21 and 18 seconds, the drones had reached the cover of the base's own buildings. The Tor operators saw them flash across the screen for half a second, then disappear into the radar shadows of hangars. The operator frantically switched to the manual sector scan, but it was too late. The drones were weaving between fuel tanks and aircraft shelters. They followed high-voltage power lines toward the flight line. Those lines carry 110,000 volts, creating an electromagnetic field that drowns out the small electric signatures of drone motors. The morning sun sat low in the eastern sky, blazing at 2 million candelas. That is 20 times brighter than car headlights on high beam. Every optical sensor, camera, and human eye looking eastward was completely overwhelmed. The drones approached from directly out of this blazing blind spot. A perimeter guard spotted them first and shouted into his radio. 3 soldiers sprinted from the ready room carrying Iglas portable missile launchers. The Iglas can lock onto a fighter jet from 6 kilometers away, but the Igla tracks heat, and electric drones barely produce any. The Igla needs something hot, like a jet engine at 600 degrees. The missile seeker head supercools itself to detect heat differences, but the solar radiation saturated the infrared sensors. Everything just whited out. One soldier fired blindly in manual mode. The missile streaked off at Mach 2, but the proximity fuse never detected the tiny plastic drones. The missile passed between them with feet to spare. The drones were now inside the minimum engagement range of 500 meters. The soldiers frantically tried to reload, but the drones blew past them, fanning out across the airfield. Their cameras started pattern matching, looking for the specific shapes of the Mi-8 and Mi-24 helicopters. It took 3 seconds to find them. Battery warnings flashed red. Less than 90 seconds of flight time remained. 4 PKM machine gun positions around the helicopter apron opened fire simultaneously. This was the last defense. The gunners unleashed everything they had, each weapon spitting out 650 rounds per minute. But hitting a small, erratic drone with a machine gun is nearly impossible. The gunners were shooting at ghosts, firing where the drone was 2 heartbeats ago. 2 drones suddenly climbed high and flew perfectly straight. A decoy maneuver. Every military instinct screams to engage the easy target. While the gunners track the decoys, 4 other drones scattered low. The gunners managed to shoot down 2 drones, but 4 made it through clean. The math had played out exactly as predicted. At 6:28, the first drone hit the Mi-24's cockpit canopy at 140 kilometers per hour. 3 kilograms of shaped charge detonated, creating a jet of molten copper moving at 8,000 meters per second. It punched through the bulletproof glass and ignited the hydraulic lines under the floor. The fire spread to the 30mm cannon ammunition, causing the rounds to cook off in a chaotic explosion. The second drone slammed into the Mi-8's auxiliary fuel tank. 500 liters of aviation fuel spilled across the hot tarmac. This fuel burns at over 2,000 degrees Celsius. The liquid fire spread underneath the already burning Mi-24, heating its main fuel tanks past the point of no return. In just 43 minutes, Ukraine's Ghost unit had eliminated 2 helicopters worth $32 million, sunk a Special Forces support vessel, and destroyed whatever mission Russia had planned for that morning. This strike proved that in modern warfare, a cheap, smart weapon could defeat a superpower's defenses anytime, anywhere. Please like and subscribe.